Good evening. My name is Roger Sherman. I'm a member of the faculty here at SCI-Arc. And it is my pleasure on behalf of the organizers of the student lecture series to welcome Mark Rios to SCI-Arc. Mark is no stranger to those architects who have been practicing in Los Angeles over the past 12 years or so, having worked with many of us as one of the area's more skilled landscape architects. His design for the grounds of Frank Gehry's residence for Eli Broad, as well as his involvement on the winning team of the Arts Park Design Competition in 1991 with Hodgson Fung and Adele Santos and Associates, is eloquent testimony to his talent and collaborative approach to design. Over the last few years, however, Mark has been rapidly earning national recognition for his architectural work, especially in the design of childcare facilities. He graduated from Harvard's Graduate School of Design actually with a dual degree in architecture and landscape architecture in 1982. It was only about 5 years ago that his office, Rios Associates, completed its first such facility for Warner Brothers, for which he last year received an honor award from the American Institute of Architects. This was followed in quick succession by ones for MCA Universal, Mattel, and more recently the U.S. Army at Camp Pendleton. By 1995, Mark was cited as one of 40 under 40 by the School of Visual Arts in New York. I became familiar with Mark's work and ideas over the years of having taught with him at UCLA's architecture program, and am most impressed with the degree to which he has managed to pursue his interest in the multidisciplinary dimensions of design practice in a manner which would have earned the attention of the Eames were they alive today. He and his associates are as involved in graphic and software design, furniture, interiors, and virtual shopping environments as they are with their considerable number of both public and private, large and small scale architectural commissions. Perhaps it is his commitment to viewing the client as not an obstacle, but an instigator of creative dialogue that explains the remarkable range of interests his work exhibits, something I think that will soon become apparent to those of you who have not yet had the pleasure of seeing his work. Please welcome Mark Rios.
Thank you, Roger. Well, thanks for inviting me to come and talk about the work in the office. As I was getting ready and putting slides together, I was sort of going through the projects to show tonight and thinking how much SCI-Arc has actually played a part of our office. You guys are doing something right over here. You have more graduates in our office than any other school. We were sort of going through all the people and where they went to school, and I think there are 8 SCI-Arc grads that have worked at Rios Associates, so you're doing something right. The purpose of these lectures, I think, is to really sort of expose you to a sort of a wide range of what people are doing, how their views are towards design, how they're practicing, the kinds of projects they're undertaking. And tonight, I've tried to pull together some examples of just a variety of things that we're exploring in the office. I think that one of the things, as Roger mentioned, you'll come away with tonight, that the work is varied, it looks different, there's a lot of variety in the things we'll be looking at. Let me give you a brief description of the office. There are basically about 20 people in the firm. We're a multidisciplinary firm. I've been in practice about 10 or 11 years, and one of the great things, the office has people that have been in it for a long time, so we're a very close, cohesive group. There are 4 sort of things that I think are particular to our office and what makes our work strong in any sort of way. The first one is this multidisciplinary aspect, and I really tell clients, and when we talk about our work, that we'll do anything. That we do architecture, we're doing landscape, we're doing graphic design, we're doing interiors, furnishing, we've been designing tiki torches, and I think we approach things with trying to tear down as many barriers as we can between how disciplines are defined. When I went to school, I could never sort of figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. I knew I loved landscape, I loved plant material, I wanted to be an architect, I liked to draw, and I finally figured out that it was okay not to decide what I wanted to be, and that you can still continue exploring and developing and questioning and never sort of have to arrive at that answer. And I hope that sort of encourages you tonight when you sort of see some of this stuff, that you don't have to figure out if you're going to be an architect or not. The next thing that I think is pretty important, that at least for the first 20 years in practice, you're never going to have somebody that comes to you and says, well, I'd like you to design this project, and while you're at it, why don't you do everything inside of it, and can you figure out how to make a logo for this thing and the whole bit. No one's ever going to say that to you. And one of the things we really try to work at is how you make something out of nothing. And that most of the projects start off with some little kernel of a project, and you kind of talk to the client and you sort of work things a little bit and you show them ideas and you transform them into something else. And I think actually some of the best work in the office is work that we were never sort of commissioned to do, but grew out of doing other projects. And so to sort of approach things that you really want to sort of like transform ideas out of something that the client didn't sort of give you to transform, I think is really an important jumping off point. When you look at the work tonight, I think you'll come away saying, well, what's their work like? Or it doesn't have a particular style to it, and that's something I'm actually kind of happy about. And if in a couple of years you see a project and you say, oh, I think that's maybe a Rios Associates project, I'm going to be really disappointed about that. And I hope if you see something in a couple of years and you go, well, that's kind of interesting, and that's sort of a different way to look at that, and I wonder who did it, then I feel like I'm on the right track. And that I think we all know a lot of designers whose work is reiterated year after year after year. And I really don't want to do that. And the curiosity and sort of the active exploration and trying to continue to look at things in sort of new ways, I think is essential for the life of any kind of designer. And so I feel okay that the work doesn't look alike. And finally, I feel really also comfortable being up here tonight and saying that I did not do this work alone, that the result of this work is about a lot of people that are really talented coming together and working in a collaborative process. And if anyone sort of talks about projects that are built in our environment and says, I did this and I did that, I think that they're sort of fooling somebody. And so I feel very fortunate that we have a very powerful group of people that are passionate about what they do in the office, and that their ideas and what they believe in comes through in all this work you're going to see. So this is our work and not my work. With that, let's start the slides. And what we're going to look at tonight, I'm going to show a couple sort of building-like projects. And the first three buildings I'm going to show are some of the things that Roger talked about, childcare centers. And what I think they're particularly appropriate to look at is to sort of compare project by project. These buildings, it's important to note, all have the same program. They're all basically centers for about 100 kids with age ranges from about 6 weeks old to kindergarten. But the projects are very different based on content, based on the personality of the client, and based on things that we just maybe interested in the office at that time, whether it's a movie we saw or something we ate or something we got excited about, and that kind of stuff comes through in the work. So think about projects you're working on in the studios where the program is just the same for everybody, yet all the work sort of like is transformed to have sort of its own idea about it. This project up on the wall is at Warner Brothers Children's Center. It's in Burbank. It's on a very flat site on the back lot of their studio. And we were given a sort of quadrant of land to work with. This building type typically has about 3 equal portions, a third parking, a third building, and a third playground. And the diagram for this project were basically 2 rational classroom wings with this figural piece that starts out in the parking lot and brings you through the building and makes all the shared spaces for the project, administration, a lunchroom, and a storytelling room. The site was really looked at as being an entire building. Some of those spaces in the building are climatically enclosed, some of them are not climatically enclosed. The outdoor spaces are seen as being outdoor classrooms. all the differentiations between indoor and outdoor are really exploded. So that sort of thin cellophane layer that tells you if you're sort of inside glass or outside glass is dematerialized as much as possible. A floor plan of the building and a model, again, just to really show the basic organization of the building, the two rational bars of classrooms with this shape piece that holds all those common pieces that goes to the middle of it. By program, we're required to have different parts of the playground for younger kids, playground for older kids, and so this figural piece sort of naturally divides that figure ground into a younger kids precinct and an older kids precinct. I'm used to walking around a lot, so I have to stay here. The entry to the building is made from the parking lot, from this curved wall that basically starts at this point. It actually moves all the way through the building and ends in a storytelling room. A cantilevered steel roof structure hangs off of that, and you can see there's sort of light fixture that was a design piece of perforated metal up inside that, so this whole thing is underlit at night. So it's really a sweeping form, a strong gesture that sort of zips you right into this building. You'll see throughout the building ideas about sort of Warner Brothers and kids and cartoons sort of used in many places. I've seen in sort of the Roadrunner piece. The sandblasted glass is also used throughout the project, trying to really sort of play up the idea of shadows and thin layers. Frank Clementi in my office was the senior designer and the project architect for this project, and sort of the key person that shepherded this one through the office. Coming into that entry space, all the sort of rational definitions of where a room should be have been sort of taken away. That canopy comes in from the parking lot, it continues right outside. Each end of the orthogonal building engages in that shaped space, so that the result of all those figure grounds is really sort of this negative place where you're in. It's made by the void in between the canopy, the rational piece of the classroom module coming in, and some of the other shape pieces coming in. Forms as far as furniture, colors, graphics were sort of thoroughly kind of pursued in this space, trying to make an environment that was sort of at kid scale, was inviting to them, open, allowing a lot of sort of connection between this entry area and the various classroom areas. The second component on that big figural piece is this lunchroom. The lunchroom is a very high space, shaped sort of plane of stucco that folds and engages on the ground. All the floors here are concrete. The concrete floor just sort of sweeps inside and outside the building. This table in the lunchroom we designed, we called it the caterpillar table. It was a whole series of little tables that could be sort of separated for kids in sort of separate dining moods, or they could sort of gang it together for this big sort of refectory table. The whole building sits on these sort of stone skis that you can see sort of engaging inside and outside of this space to try to build in as many sort of seating and perching places and gathering places as we could. And outside of each one of these sort of figural pieces, there are courts and outdoor spaces, so the room can always expand and sort of spill out into the playground spaces. This is the storytelling room at the end of this canopy, which you can see on the slide on the left. Both sides of it open up to playground areas, trying to create sort of the idea of a theater space. And the side on the right, you can see a big storefront that opens up, these sort of overscaled theater curtains the kids can use for sort of dramatic play if they want to have a theater for this outdoor amphitheater. In the middle of this room is a storytelling carpet that was designed by actually Shinning Chow in my office, and it's used to define spaces as far as where the kids sort of gather to watch video, where the storytelling chair sits, and where big areas of kids will gather for stories. The kids also have little individual pillows that are sort of like the little dots on the carpet. They can sort of gather around and sit on this carpet that's sort of filled with all these sort of multicultural icons that are jumping off points for storytelling. The two rational buildings, the classroom areas, are defined by several different layers. The back layer is sort of all the quiet spaces. There's the main active areas for the classrooms, these porches which are defined by screens, and then finally the playground spaces. The screens were really designed as props, almost like the movie sets, which actually you can see from the Childcare Center, but as structure that kids can hang sheets and towels on and make houses and forts and are abstract enough so you can sort of pass through those and create your own sort of doors and windows, trying to give some information but not too much information. The curtain wall that defines all the classrooms is a mixture of this colored fin ply, clear glass, translucent glass, rib glass, graphic glass, and throughout the building, we've sort of hidden all these caricatures sort of around in the glass panels. I remember going to the dentist office and having this dumb magazine called Highlights. I don't know if any of you remember that or not, but you would find the animals in the highlights. And I think the idea for this really came about from trying to have the kids be able to find and discover these little characters that are sometimes hidden up in the top of little glass window panes. This is the entry into the classrooms. They're paired entries coming into all the sort of cubicles where each kid can sort of put all their stuff and parents can stash things. And there are openings then from this entry area to look into each one of the classrooms. The classrooms, and you can see then the cubicles in that on the right-hand slide in the back, those openings basically are one huge space, all linked together. These large-scale Glulam beams are the basic structural support that start in the sort of quiet areas in the back and pass through the active areas, going out and holding these big porches in front of the building. And the curtain wall is a sort of thin cellophane layer that sort of is inserted in between those Glulam beams that's provided by shade from these slats, which are both at the horizontal and the vertical plane. In this project, as you start to look at it, you can see that the architect we did a lot here. This is a line of furniture we designed for the project. Frank developed this sort of chair. We call it the Boomerang Chair. It's made out of basically two simple parts: ambidextrous ambidextrous legs. They're bolted together. This came out of solving a program need. There weren't any chairs on the open market for the centers that were able to be screwed together and parts could be replaced. And the providers were always complaining about chairs' legs would break or would bend, they'd have to throw the chair away. And so out of sort of that need, we were able to convince them basically to let us design a chair. We worked with childcare consultants testing the chair as far as its stability and everything else, and came up with this chair. Also, this is a stackable chair, and there aren't any stackable kids' chairs on the market. So we really tried to solve some basic sort of program things with this design solution. Outside in the playground, there are certain sort of figural pieces that raise out of a grid pattern that become little kids' playhouses, laugh houses. There's this sort of symbolic tree, like a tree house, that comes out of one of these sort of stucco pieces, trying to animate the playground and provide as many spatial experiences as possible. This is the Disney Childcare Center, and when Disney came to us to design this project, we were really excited about it, and they said there's only one problem with this. We want to have this project done in 6 months, and so you have to use modular buildings. And we're like, oh no, modular buildings, trailers, and they sent us out to this big trailer factory in Ventura or Riverside or someplace. They make all these trailers that they use for classrooms, for schools, basically, that are pretty awful. And so we started this project with sort of two things. One is we were going to learn more about trailers than anybody ever knew in their life. And we're going to learn about every single piece that goes together, how the structure works, what you need to have, what you don't need to have, what you can change, what you can add, what you can modify, what you can't modify, how it's shipped. So we were going to make the best damn trailer we ever saw. And then how do you sort of do another piece that's more of a site-specific piece that sort of contrasts or holds its own against these very, very rational factory-built building pieces. And from that came this idea of this sort of quirky canopy structure which would enclose space, make an entry, make some public spaces for the building, and kind of hold all these trailers we had to use. I think in the end, you really can't tell these are trailers, except they're sort of rational pieces. But you start to see how this roof structure covers and encloses these very rational building components. The idea which was pursued for this trailer structure, which we'll see, was to use telephone poles that are all exactly 28 feet tall. They hit the sort of datum line across the entire site. Because we really wanted to leave them unfinished and we had a problem with the kids sort of getting splinters, we put these stainless steel sort of skirts on the bottom of them, and then we were worried about water getting in the top, and so we did this sort of stainless steel fez that sort of sits on the top of them that sort of reflects the sky and sort of dematerializes it. And so that was sort of this datum line, this forest of poles going over the entire site, all 28 feet tall, all with skirts and all with fezzes. And then from that, these sort of cross beams start attaching at different heights and different angles. They move and sort of manipulate to raise up this canopy. And we cloaked it with this red roof, and we had this sort of image of this kind of red scarf that was sort of like flowing over the entire site. This is just a model looking at that canopy in one of the early stages of it and seeing how all those other building pieces sort of tucked underneath it. Looking at ways of cutting the canopy out to get light. This is a shot from the lobby. The first space you go into then is the sort of the entry, the check-in point for the center, and this is inside that canopy space, but now that canopy has been enclosed by a sort of a huge redwood fence that encloses the entire site, but now it grows to 12 and 15, 18-foot proportions. And I think in starting this project, we kept on trying to tie back into what our memories of being a kid were, and all these incredible forts we built seemed to be sort of important. And John, our office, John Black, spent a lot of time, I think, thinking about all his forts that he had built when he was sort of starting to work at all these roofs. There are 4 or 5 different roof planes, different angles, all of the clerestory windows in between them, so that light just comes in between all the cracks and planes of all these pieces. All the wood is exposed. So it feels almost if the kids could have built this themselves. And inside that, then everything is wood or it's red. For some reason, we thought red was the right color here. I'm not quite sure why. But all the countertops, the laminate are all red. We have a carpet that is sort of a Dalmatian red spot carpet. And one of the really amazing things, and one of the things I get so excited about projects are all the things that surprise you, that we never realized that from the clerestory windows, the roof would reflect this sort of red light inside this space, which you can see on the side on your right. And that sort of like was a great, magical thing to have happen. From this lobby space, the floor continues wrapping right out, and now the kids are supposed to go to their classrooms, and they are supposed to be quiet, and they are supposed to be good. And so we made this sort of symbolic little bridge that they crossed over. And the idea is when they went up this little bridge, they went back down the other side. This is sort of this transformation, of course, which never works. But that the act of that threshold seemed to be pretty important. And again, we got really involved in all the connections and how the joints go and what the scale is and what pieces are big, what pieces are small, how they're chamfered. And which I think you can kind of start seeing in a lot of those handrail details. And again, on the slide on the left, how all those 28-foot poles sort of accept all these other cross beams at different heights and allow us to sort of manipulate the experience of this overhead plane that folds up and down as you go down that walkway. Again, just other photographs of that canopy. At the end, it sort of like kicks up a little bit. And we had this chore of how do you light this thing, and Disney, of course, wants to use something that's very efficient and expensive, and we certainly don't want to have fluorescent lights up there, exterior fluorescent lights. And so we had this idea that if these are really these kind of big trees, they should have coconuts up inside of them. And so we pursued this idea of how you make coconuts, which we're basically taking an industrial light fixture and working out. I didn't work it out, so I can say that's a fairly ingenious system of bent conduits. I think there may be 5 or 6 different shapes and different angles, and each light fixture had a different, ABC and ADE sort of combination of these conduits, so that the end product were these very animated, sort of growing, almost like flower-like light fixtures that came off these columns that basically would light the playground and the arcade and the entry to all the buildings. here's our diagram of everything we learned about modular buildings. Modular buildings come in 12-foot widths, and their lengths are varying. And this really shows kind of what we wanted to explore and capture, and how we wanted to have each figural piece read sort of independently and separately, how we wanted to express the structure. We wanted to take away the ceilings. We wanted to change the spatial volume of the shoebox inside, how we'd insert core pieces into it that would read as their own sort of figural form in this sort of very cool, quiet box, and contrast them with this sort of quirky, cranky sort of piece that sits out in front of it. The slide on the left shows the inside of one of the classrooms. A few of the victories we made with modular buildings, which aren't a lot. All the steel structures exposed, and we used this sort of insulation that's like a pillowed insulation up in top, which is great for sound, but also sort of soft quality. And it let us not have 8-foot ceilings, which is sort of typical in this building type. And you can see the core that's slipping through that, which basically holds all the surfaces, which is a very animated, sort of colorful shaped sort of form. And the system of light fixtures we designed, again, this is like a solution that's based on somebody saying you only have X amount of dollars and all you can afford are recessed lights. And you saying, well, I really don't want to have recessed lights, so what else can we do? And really exploring stock pieces. This is a unistrut piece that comes off the J-box off the wall that holds 2 off-the-shelf uplight fixtures and 2 bullet lights at the end to sort of light all the kids' artwork. We did sort of all these cost analysis that showed that this had more light lumens per square foot than these other fixtures, ended up being less expensive, but we really wanted to have these kind of big caterpillar sort of legs coming out. But you sell design by being rational, even though it may not be rational in the end. These are images of the cores. This is the core of the bathrooms for all the kids, trying to make those core spaces as translucent as possible and borrow light, but still give privacy that you need. We had a lot of fun with kind of snake laminate. In here there's a green and yellow great snake laminate. And at the end of this core piece is this special kids play structure, and we used basically a translucent cow material for both the wall and the ceiling, trying to create this sense of this folded plate that sort of wraps down, and light is just sort of filtering through it. Again, trying to play with sort of all the shadows and keep this shell building sort of very cool. And finally, I mentioned this kind of fence that grew up and became the walls of that fort in the entry area, where the fence becomes somewhat of a normal fence as it wraps around the building, but it starts to make spaces for the kids to inhabit, like little forts in various places that have different kinds of shapes and forms and windows. We used a lot of corrugated fiberglass so they could get light and sort of make noise. And there's this sort of a composition of how the wood siding is applied. You can sort of see in the slide on the left that, again, sort of feels like somebody changed and modified and added this over time, like the kids on some weekends have got out there and sort of changed this a little bit themselves. Finally, the project for MCA, another childcare center, same size, same age group, same kind of client. The site is really different here. We're on a hill, and we overlook the entire San Fernando Valley. It's a great site. And this is, again, one of those little miracles you never think about, that originally they gave us this site and we were sitting down in this parking lot down below, and we had no view. We were really sitting in the parking lot. And at that time, they were building a city walk, and they had like 20 million trillion yards of soil they had to find a place to dump. So, of course, the Childcare Center is a little dog project compared to city walks, so they're going to dump it on our site. And so the thing that was kind of nice about it is after you really kind of got into it and accepted that you had to deal with this, that we could grade the site then, we could shape it, we could make the form of it, we could figure out how you were going to sort of go up that site, and made this sort of like hill base that our building would sit on, sort of developed this whole idea of once you're raised up now, you really feel like you're perched on the edge of this cliff that you're just going to like take off and just sort of fly out into the San Fernando Valley. So the whole nature of the building really transformed. It became this huge wing, and none of the glass, no walls touch the ceiling. It's all glass. This thing just floats, and this whole image about sky and the hill and sort of freedom and everything really sort of took off from that sort of problem we thought we had to deal with all that dirt. A set of sort of complex forms for this project make that make the entry space, and they're programmatically the same as all the other centers, a reception desk, and this round piece is a staff room. One of the things that this director was really strong about is the staff really need to have a place to escape to, and that they could get away from the kids. And when we sort of thought about that, and thought about people taking care of kids for 8 hours a day, 15 kids, and you really needed to have like this place you could go to that would be like a quiet, minimal, Zen Japanese pavilion. And I think, that sort of was the inspiration for trying to look at this space that would perch out over the hill. It was very quiet. It was a concrete block. It was this round, sort of nurturing form. You feel like you were protected for once. And the roof floats above it. There's this kind of skylight in the middle of it where the beams don't meet, and the sun sort of moves around in the daytime on the floor from that sort of opening in the roof. So this was really this sort of very kind of sacred place you go to and sort of get away from all the other stuff you had to deal with. This shows the section of the building. I mentioned this kind of wing roof, which was built like an airplane wing with two sort of frames, one sort of roof framing and one ceiling framing. All the systems could sort of go in that sort of interstitial space we made. Then it's wrapped with different kinds of members that enclose the space for water on the top side and diffuse and open up on the bottom side for light and ventilation, things to come through it. This space, that roof was really shaped in a very particular way, always to allowing views sort of out to the valley on the front side, and then looking up this hillside on the back side. And all the kids are basically in between the building and the hill, so we really wanted to make their spaces feel like you're living on the hill and you're sort of part of the landscape. And so the building sort of burrows itself back in that hillside. This building picture on the left is a little classroom that's sort of half underground and half exposed, and you may be able to see on the edge of the left slide sort of this dark form. It's a concrete wall that's sort of slipping through the entire building, and all the service program stuff is stuffed underneath the ground behind that wall. The little round skylights that come into it, so the kids can actually get up on the hill and look down into little spaces and see other kids having their diapers changed and people cooking food and things like that. But again, the topography here really, really informed the concept and the diagram and the development of the building. The end of the roof, how it sort of turned and ended, looked at a lot of gas stations to sort of figure out how to do this. And while we're doing this, again, we're trying to sort of get in as much as we can. We're looking at designing furniture for the building. And Guido Porto, actually from SCI-Arc, worked in the office for quite a while and designed this desk. This was the director's desk. And this was sort of a real departure because we've been thinking about these forms for a long time being three-dimensional, like the roof form that had this interstitial space. And as Guido sort of developed the idea and we talked about it in the office, this became a much more planar idea, this sort of folded plate that sort of wrapped around and turned, and other parts of it came up and did things you needed to do, like hid the back of computers and gave this place to put postums on, so she can line up all her little notes, or he can line up all his little notes. And those two slides I think were real important. They're important for me to look at to see how an idea may start as one thing and it sort of like transforms and becomes something else. And that seems to be important in a lot of the work in the office, that we're doing a lot of borrowing of ideas, and that's I think one of the great things about collaboration is you're looking over somebody's desk and you're sort of seeing what they're doing, and there's a willingness and a positiveness about doing that. It's not like you're stealing or anything. And this is a house that we designed, which I think is not going to get built this time, but it's sort of the first transformation of Guido's desk that he worked on that then became something else, a sort of really sculptural folded plate for this roof. And this is a model now of a house that actually is getting built. there was another sort of interpretation of this, and Jennifer in our office has been working on this project. It's the foundations are in, and it's basically a series of sort of rational building pieces, which you can see on the left-hand slide, which hold bedrooms and bathrooms and things like that, and then the sort of freer form where all the sort of public spaces are, living room, dining room, kitchen, and then down in sort of the battered form is a theater. There's sort of an entertainment person that has a super duper theater, so you sort of go down into this cavern-like space to watch movies. I'm jumping now to sort of another kind of project. This is a project that's under construction. It's for redoing a shopping mall in San Diego, Mission Valley Mall. Some of you may know it. It was sort of a tired 50s mall that then somebody came in and did this really bad sort of Pomo 70s number to it that looks not good. And the developer wanted to sort of spruce it up and give it a fresh new look. The building is totally 100% orthogonal. That you go down the shopping mall in a very clear way and you turn left and then you go a little bit and then you turn right and you go down to the next big anchor store and then you turn right again, then you turn left, and all the paving, everything, the canopies, everything is at 90 degrees to everything else. And one of the first things when we were looking at this, we thought, God, how do you kind of loosen this thing up a bit? How do you get people to move through this in a little bit more of a, interesting way? And in looking at that and looking at the site and looking at colors and forms and just kind of what we were interested in at the time, we thought it'd be really incredible to make this like a gigantic aquarium, that you could feel like you're walking through an aquarium when you went to the shopping mall. And we had so much fun. We have like this great tropical fish store by the office, and a couple of us went over to the tropical fish store and we bought like all these plastic plants and aquarium gravel, and all this paraphernalia. And our first presentation, we went into the client and put this huge big piece of black velvet down the conference table, very dramatic, and started setting up all these aquarium pieces and our plants we had bought and laying out gravel, and slowly started bringing out these boards telling the story about how you would sort of be miniaturized and sort of walk through this space. Ideas, I think, can start with a really powerful kind of inception like that, but then they sort of transform and they become abstracted. I think in the end, when we sort of look at this, we look at the paving patterns, I don't know if anybody will really ever say this is an aquarium, but I don't think that matters. I think that was so instrumental for us to think about the forms and patterns and textures you'll see in this place. So anyway, this side on the left was a idea board about this great aquarium you could inhabit. On the right were images. We started showing them about paving and looking at sort of coral formations and structure, and then how you sort of do that three-dimensionally. These two slides, we're looking at a canopy system, and you can hopefully see the sketches up on the left corner of this very soft, flowing canopy, which we put shade cloth on in different colors, and then looking at all the kinds of ways that we use concrete and colored it and added aggregate and sandblasted it and put in little bits of glass and tile and things to create some of these patterning ideas. Forward. The plant material was thought of as being, ocean-like, tons of grasses. We used a lot of succulents, so they had sort of coarse qualities to them, again, like that sort of board on the left. And then try to develop a whole series of pieces within that sort of were a jumping off point from that design idea. There was a system of street furniture that was developed, as you can see in this sort of curving form on the right-hand slide, that came off of a coral piece. And this system only has 3 parts to it. It has a middle part with a hole in it and 2 end parts. And maybe you can see, I'm not sure if you can, the drawing up above it shows all the different ways that system can be combined. You can have little schools of fish, you can have really long eels, you can have coral heads, you can have very complicated kinds of forms. And with that, we said we want these to be 3 great lime green, this kind of cobalt blue color, and we can make any kind of form or pattern with this to create space and shape places that deal with all the proportions that come along in this shopping center. This idea that shows all the little wired chairs and umbrellas was trying to make a abstracted tide pool, this sort of upside down fountain that over 30 minutes the water would sort of rise and drop, and people would want to sort of come back and see if things were covered up where they weren't covered up before. This is a drawing that shows the mall, basically, all the paving patterns. You can sort of get an idea of, you've all been in many malls, I'm sure this looks familiar, the sort of deadly orthogonal spaces, and then trying to see how this pattern then starts really transforming that, leading you to different places. We were stuck with using a lot of materials. There's a lot of brick in this place, so a lot of the brick color was existing, and we'd saw, cut, and added other things to it. And in this plan, you may be able to see, maybe not, but actually the formation of all those kinds of street furniture pieces. My favorite one is this sort of coral head piece up in the top, which sort of snakes in and out. And these are just images from the computer, traveling through the spaces, trying to help the client really understand what it was going to be like, what these canopies would be like, other kinds of store pieces we wanted to add to the inside experience to sort of change that orthogonal geometry of all the shops. A couple other projects, again, to talk about the ideas and where they come from and how the pattern sort of develops. This project is for the new outpatient Veterans Clinic in Sepulveda in the valley that was demolished by the earthquake. The architects basically designed a very clean, sort of rational building, which you can see in the lower part of the slide on the left. There's parking to the north of that, above it, and they designed this pedestrian mall, whatever that is, that was meant to link the sort of viewpoint on the southern part of the site through the building, which had a big atrium through it, past the parking area, to this amphitheater, and then to all the other VA facilities. Our job as a landscape architect was to try to develop that space as it sort of went through the site and it traveled into the building, traveled out of the building the other side, and sort of make it a continuous experience. But the big but was that the average age of the person that comes to this building is like 76 years old. They have a lot of ambulatory difficulties, and they really don't like to walk more than about 50 feet at a time. And so all of a sudden, we were sitting with this drawing that's great. It's very rational. It's very clear. Has a strong sense of organization. But yet, the people that are going to inhabit this thing, if they look down this thing and see they're going to walk 2,000 feet to where they're going, they're never going to make it. And so the idea was to try to somehow completely transform this axis. You still had to be able to see down it. You still had to realize that someday I have to get down to the end point. But this other set of experiences would be overlaid on top of that to create all these sort of destination points. So you go a little over here, you go a little over there, you go behind these trees, you go in front of these trees. So the experience was transformed. And this drawing denotes all those sorts of places we're trying to make, how the views change, how walls are made by plant material that break down that space, so that it's okay if you go over there. You feel okay, you can take a break, and then you can go to the next place. But when you look at these patterns, that's sort of why I tell the story, is the patterns have a very compositional, abstract, I would hope, maybe beautiful quality to them, but you don't necessarily have an idea of where they came from. But these patterns aren't arbitrary in their origin. They maybe have some arbitrariness in their pattern-making quality, but they sort of were based on an idea that came from the program, which came from the client, which is really a real thing to make this a better place for the veterans that have to come to this place. Another big sort of landscape project, this is for the new county hospital that actually now the Board of Supervisors have decided not to build, to replace the existing county hospital. A huge project. This is an overall site drawing. There's a tremendous grade change from this lower street up to sort of where the circle is. There's about a 60-foot grade change. The width of this sort of main circulation space is about 80 feet. This is about, I don't know, maybe 3 football fields from there up to there, so we're talking about a lot of area. And again, the architecture sort of induces a rational ordering system in this entire site. And we started looking at this and saying the biggest experience everybody's going to have on this site is moving up and down, which is difficult in this first place, and from the building looking down on it. And so we had this sort of image, this gigantic, almost like a WPA tapestry that was sort of thrown down on the site that'd be about some other idea. And our departure point was sort of California history and our culture, and that this area before were agricultural fields. And so we started, playing around with these huge strawberries and grapes and tomatoes and grapefruits and all sorts of things, and seeing how they started making spaces, how they made planting areas, how they made walkways, how they make ramps, how they make sitting areas, that their fragmented form may not be readable as a scale that you're rapid. As you sort of climb this thing and look back, those pieces started falling together. And the drawing on the right shows sort of the first take of looking at that entire site and looking at sort of all the transformations of how the pattern makes places and spaces. As this progressed, the pattern actually became more abstract. I think it became better by becoming more abstract. I don't think anybody would know they were standing on a strawberry anymore, but it really helped as a way to sort of give ideas about how to transform this ground plane. Two more sketches of another part of the project, sort of the front end, a big drop-off area where people are pulling in and going into an outpatient clinic. Again, this actually has some of the remnants of all of our fruit pattern. You can see these big kind of grapes and a lemon up here, and those were transformed more abstractly in other sketches. Another site idea, this was for a Kaiser Hospital project. Dale Wall in the office is sort of the leader on this project. And this is another one that it sounds just great. This is a sunken courtyard. It's at the main entry to the building. This building has been added on to for many years with all these sort of towers that come up around it. The main cafeteria for the entire space is underground. It opens up under the space. So everyone is going to walk by this, they're going to look at it, they're going to be in it. This is the center point of this entire cultural life of this place. And we're like, great, we got this job, terrific, let's start working on it. And you start thinking about it and you realize, like a big thing here, this does not ever get any sunlight. That the buildings are so tall around here, they've added on so many different ways that there is one wall surface, which you can sort of see with this green sponges, that like a couple days in the summer it's going to get some casts of natural sunlight. Otherwise, it never is going to see sunlight. And how do you make a space then that's supposed to be the one landscape experience, the kind of oasis place that sort of you can get away to and sort of forget about technology and everything else, but you don't have any sunlight to deal with? And, and sort of playing with that and developing and thinking about it. Again, in this particular scheme, we turn this pattern making idea that starts in the cafeteria, which the slide on the left shows, where the checkout lines are, where you sort of like pick up your trays and you move out through all the table areas, and those patterns just zip you right outside. And then we cloak the entire inside of this in sort of this bright lime green sort of metal panel system to make it feel like sunlight was always hitting it, even though sunlight was never hitting it. And really tried to give the idea of this being a space that was abstract in nature, that had light, it was living, in a conceptual kind of way. And again, that inspiration really came about from just trying to solve the problem of the space. Right slide, wrong. I'm going to show you just a couple gardens. This is a really big garden, then I'm going to show you a couple of small gardens. This is a project we worked on for about 4 or 5 years. Polly Furrow in the office was the sort of principal landscape person working on it. And the house was designed by Frank Gehry. This is a complex relationship between the architect and the client that we were at times stuck in the middle and at times outside of. And it's a very tough problem, how you take a site that is a complete hillside, it's a very, very long site, you have a very powerful piece of architecture on it. What do you do that has your own sort of idea about it that doesn't, that works with this other piece of stuff going on? And basically, what you'll see in these slides, we created a whole series of very strong retaining walls that were clad in stone to try to create this sort of super scale for the entire site that would hold the house. And these walls would weave through the house and come out on the other side that really tended to shape and create places on this hillside. the other sort of leading idea, which you'll see as we go through it, was that everything, in order to make it feel bigger and to make it feel effortless, is extremely edited. That for example, for a project like this size, you might have a plant palette that has like 200 plant types on it. This plant palette has like 20 types on it. Very, very, very minimal textures and planting. So you come through, this is in Brentwood, you drive through Brentwood, everybody has done their little American dream in Brentwood. Every house has a different style, different form, different landscape. I think in the blocks between Sunset and this house, you probably pass through every single plant material that will ever grow in Southern California. And you come up to this project, this gate that we designed sort of opens up, you go in these stone walls, and you go through this tunnel of pepper trees. I think this front experience has like 3 plant materials: a really big leaf acanthus, actually a podocarpus hedge, a star jasmine, and this very airy pepper tree. And we were really lucky we were able to find from places all over Southern California huge pepper trees. When we installed them, they would actually like touch and make this sort of space you drove through. And we always called this a decompression chamber, that as you came through Brentwood, you just went through all this scrap, basically. Nice scrap, but lots of it. And that you had to come to this place and all of a sudden go into this space and go like, you know, you could finally take this breath, you'd kind of relax, you would go through this tunnel that was light and it would move and it was airy, and it would prepare you to see this great art that you were going to start seeing. And so the landscape was really used as a device to cleanse the palate. And along that experience of all the pepper trees, there are places that sculptures start happening, and there are also viewpoints. This is one of the first views of the house you get when the pepper trees open up. You see the house, the pepper trees close back up again, you keep driving through. The walls start appearing that really sculpt the land, that have their own sort of geometry that you don't know where it comes from. You move along until you reach a motor court, which is basically Frank's space. We did the ground plane, but the space was his definition. And then we pierced the ground plane with this little slot of water and backlit the water so that at nighttime, that rippling of the water would reflect in all these walls and the stainless steel to sort of animate that space. So it's sort of this very, very quiet space. You don't even hear the water. It's really just sort of this kind of lighting rippling that comes from that slot of water against the wall. Walls then extend out from the house, sculpt the site. One of the other really lucky things we had to deal with is because this had some major utility problems, the DWP had to be able to get a, 15-foot wide truck down to the middle of the site once a year. And so all these sort of like ramped pieces had to be developed so a truck could actually drive down this big lawn. But we actually, after a while, really started loving that idea because we really wanted the scale to be so strange here that it would change your perception, and that these walls are at times 5 feet tall, but other places are like 20 feet tall, and grass just comes right up to them and bang, just hits them dead. There's no foundation planting. You know, we're not embarrassed about these walls. And as you walk down these 15-foot sort of ramped grass plains between these walls, you really feel as though, you know, somebody had carts here, you know, thousands of years ago, sort of moving between these walls. And that sort of memory of that deals with scale and mass and procession were sort of, I think, important in developing the ideas for the project. The house sits on this big stone platform. Frank wanted the house to be in water. We sort of took that idea and sort of tried to figure out how to shape this thing and make it work. All these edges are basically free edges, water spills over it, and developed this way that is moderately successful from a detailing point of view of raising the water level really, really high so that the top of the water from the top of the stone is about 1.5 inches. Regular pools are about like 6 inches or something. So you really felt like you were just walking right on the surface of the water, sort of skimming the top of it. And it's a pretty great feeling to walk across those stones. And then on the back side, those stone walls batter back down. The water just sheets down in this very, very quiet sheets of water. It picks up with the texture of the stone to get this sort of rippling, the way it reflects light, and then it dies in this gravel bed at the bottom of it. So all this water is going down this thing, all of a sudden just goes into gravel and it disappears. And underneath that gravel is like this enormous vault, this reservoir, that has a cubic section of like 6 by 6 or 8 by 8 to hold all the water that's accumulated with all that water flowing down. But the end look is just that it's a sort of effortless experience of that water just cascading down the walls and just going away. We had a real problem though. How do you take the water that's sheeting down the face of these walls, and we need to put stairs next to them so you get from this upper level down to the lower level. And so we built a lot of models, and the contractor made a lot of wooden forms which we ran water down, and we were successful and unsuccessful in varying times to try to create this sort of rivulet system that would collect water as it came down these slope faces and then spill water down to the rivulet next to it, and this sort of stepped little waterfall as you went down each one of those stairs. And one of the things that we didn't realize would happen, again, one of the surprises, but is really great about it, is that you really can't hear the water that sheets down the big surfaces, but you can hear the water in the little rivulets next to the stairs. So where you walk, you actually hear the sound, but you don't hear the sound when you walk around the big masses of it. And that sort of scale change between these little water pieces and the big sheets was a lot of fun. Again, we got to, you've maybe seen in these photographs, a lot of great artists did site-specific pieces, the Richard Serra installation. Incredible experience walking through these huge curved plates of steel, which are 20 feet tall. The pool in this project was really looked at as being like a stone quarry. It was somehow nestled between all the stone walls, and the pool shape is a void. The pool is like glue that sort of like flows in between all the walls that make it shape. The walls at the end of the pool are about maybe 10 or 12 feet above the surface level of the water, and we took the stone right down into the water, and it's about a 9-foot pool. So when you go down, you finally swim back around that deep, and you really feel like you're in these stone walls, like a stone quarry. There's a little place you can kind of escape between the two walls in the back. Without it, it'd be kind of claustrophobic if you couldn't. But again, that image of this quarry and how water worked with stone, again, raising the water level up as high as possible was really important, sort of creating all those forms. The other end of the site, we sort of looked at these ideas about agrarian land form and developed a series of these sort of precincts that you could grow herbs in and have hot houses and citrus trees that would sort of extend out along a path to the sort of destination point. And then on this sloped surface, we thought was the one place in the site we wanted to use color in a really powerful way. From their gym, they look out down on the site. The entire site is basically green. Maybe some white flowers, but it's pretty green. But here, Dale in the office sort of developed this really incredible perennial garden that it looks as though you took a regular perennial garden and you put it in a Xerox machine, you blew it up about 12 times, and instead of having the plants placed with like 3 species, another 4 species, another 3 species, we have like 18 and 20 and 17. And so you get this very, very big texture of all those flowers in the perennial garden. And finally, just the plant material that, as you're thinking about a building, you have some range of comfort in detailing windows and walls. That same sort of finesse needs to happen in the selection of every plant that goes in the project. This is sort of a white sage that has one sort of seasonal period. Star jasmine that's flowing over the walls, it's fragrant. A really coarse texture of flax that you sort of walk next to and sort of wandering through paths. Again, very few plants, very, very large groupings, trying to make this space feel really strong and powerful. A couple of small gardens. This one is tiny, tiny, tiny. It's for a 50s house up in the Hollywood Hills. It's kind of like a house that wanted to be a case study house but never made it. And so we try to help it along that process. and ripped the back of it off and added some canopies and trellis structures that sort of extended the space right out, and had to put in this big retaining wall in the back that was a pretty strong shape, again, based on the form of the hill, and then try to develop this idea, again, a little bit like the other project, that the water is not the form, the water is the glue, there are other specific shapes that make places out in that area, and the water just sort of slips in between all of them. So in this diagram, actually that Julie drew, you can see there's a long sort of lap lane that you can swim in. There's sort of a big open part of the pool where you can kind of like hang out and play volleyball or whatever you want to do in it. And there's a jacuzzi that sort of wraps back around this patio, so that if you were to say, design me a pool, you would never think of a shape like that. The shape is really based on trying to make all these other figure pieces read and let that be the poche. And since we wanted to break down inside and outside, we had to bring the water inside. And so on the side on the right, you can see this little koi pond comes into the family room, so you can feed the fish on the inside of the house. And again, all the glass is budded glass and mullionless and sort of hangs out over the water. So it's just that thin layer of cellophane that sort of separates you from the outside. From this sort of very controlled area that man is certainly, is strong-handed, there's this sort of very tenuous stair that goes up into sort of a more wild world of, actually just another view of that stair and some glass wall detailing in that project. The plant material was very, very loose, very rough, sort of a hillside landscape on hormones, really, exaggerated sort of combinations of plants and textures to sort of like intensify that experience of coming from this very ordered world up to the hillside, this very rough place. Another small garden, there's really no plant material here, but that's sort of not a requirement for a garden. Walls and ground plane. This is a little house in the Hollywood Hills. We just built a court, a wall in the front of it. It was a gravel garden, stone that leads you into the front door, and then a water piece which spills water from this sort of funny copper cistern-like thing through this slot of water that travels through the garden, through the stone piece, and then ends up in this well at the other side, and all you hear is the water sort of echoing in the well. So nobody ever has to clean up this garden or mow anything, but it's a very quiet sort of Zen-like space. I'm going to go through two quick interiors projects, and then I'll show you some furniture, and that'll be about it. These two I selected because they're really different. They're both about the same size. The first one's for Arista Records. The second one's for Stone Stanley, a production company. This first one is very rational, expensive materials. It's a very sort of ordered quality to it. The design was really based on using sort of cherry aluminum, sandblasted glass, and a fairly tight way, trying to borrow light as much as we could from the exterior wall and bring it inside. So as many partitions so we could make as glass, a sort of dematerialized walls was used. Some of the furniture we bought, some of the furniture we designed. But again, trying to work with sort of the imagery of this client and what they wanted to develop a space for them. These are two sort of corridors in the project, one that actually has all the assistance stations and one that doesn't have assistance stations. Again, looking at the sort of combination of wood and metal and glass and that sort of light borrowing idea, and trying to make this space feel very long and quiet and horizontal. Oops. This is the conference room, again, sort of developing some more of those details, but a little bit more idiosyncratic manners. This project is for a company, Stone Stanley Productions. They make game shows, and they have no budget, and they have a very different sort of corporate image than Arista Records does. It's interesting because these projects were running almost parallel in the office, and the same two team members were sort of working on this project and working on the other project simultaneously. We did this idea for them, the side on the left, it's this thing we call the decorometer, and we wanted to convey to them a way that we would talk about where we're going to have a lot of energy and we're going to be really kind of wild here, and other areas we're going to be a little bit more quiet, where they really had to convince people to give them lots of money. And so we sort of developed this kind of ordering system to communicate sort of the design volume for the project. And this collage was sort of a way that we talked about space making and forms for the project. I think when this project was going on, Frank and I in the office, for some reason, we both saw like that nanny show on television at the same time, all those sort of fun and graphic ideas, which were sort of jumping off points of looking at how you sort of communicate information. And they wanted to be able to tell people what they were doing and what their company does as sort of a PR kind of idea. And so we developed these kind of graphics, which you'll see in the space in a minute. This one shows all the kinds of things they can do, so why you should hire them. They make game shows and exercise videos and a talk show. And then one on the left shows what they're doing. That's, if they're out pitching a deal, if they're writing, if they're in the studio, if they're in the bathroom, if they're in the gym, they sort of rotate this thing around to where they are in the day. And then the interiors for this really sort of developed trying to find some really simple, cheap ways of making those things come together. And Scott, who has this company, I think the first meeting he had with Julie and I, he said two things. First of all, that he wanted this to be cheap and peppy, and that his company motto was, "Be happy or be gone," which is a little weird. So we thought, okay, what do we do with this here, And I think it's actually pretty terrific. I think it's pretty terrific, that idea and that energy, and sort of allowing us the freedom to sort of take that and just like run with it, Clients don't really do that very often, so we were really, really lucky. So in this project, we started off by saying we, for some reason, like brown. And everybody else does black, black is cool, and we really love brown. And so I think we have a Baskin Robbins near our office, and they have kind of a lot of black and pink and orange in it. And so somehow, brown and pink and orange seem to sort of be important to us for some reason. And so we ended up using a lot of sort of off-the-shelf brown laminate desks and sort of applying things to them. The walls are sort of a paper bag brown color, sort of a brown carpet. We used a sort of flake board for all the baseboard moldings, and then let these kind of graphic things be what gave it its personality. We kind of had a lot of fun with their name, the Stone Stanley, on these flippers. They can turn and say out to lunch whenever they want to. Their waiting room, they wanted to make you feel like you're waiting as a contestant for this game show. And so somehow we had this idea that we have to make this space like that. And so of course we started looking at game show chairs, what it's like to be waiting for a game show like you're on the dating game or something. And so sort of started looking at that. And at the same time trying to bring in other ideas. And again, I'm not quite sure why or where, the idea of sort of the twister game seemed to be pretty important. And so we designed this rug that is based on sort of this twister game, which is sort of, I think, important in a lot of the memory of the people and of the age groups that are sort of coming here and pitching projects. In their offices, now this is where the decor meter went down to like a 4 instead of like an 8 or a 9. They had to somehow convey this people, yes, please give me $3 million that they need to do this project. And so here we were trying to be a little bit more serious, but not too serious. Again, this project doesn't have a lot of money, and so we tried to find ways of using surfacing that was kind of fun and cheap. Their big mural behind their desk, which is this kind of big sculptural form, is carpet padding, that kind of colorful carpet padding. And we had so much fun going to bad wallpaper stores for this project. There are about 8 or 9 different kinds of wallpaper everywhere. I don't know if you saw in that lobby, there's like this really great red striped wallpaper that's sort of like a bordello or something. And then looking at some detailing that again takes a lot of brown wood, but tries to make it kind of nice and elegant. Looking at sort of, very clean, simple, modern furniture for their office. 2 examples of just other spaces, again, wallpaper gone mad here. One of the vice presidents loves sort of like all this Laura Ashley stuff. which we weren't so crazy about, but once we started thinking about it, we loved it. And so she got this great floral wallpaper in her office, and then in the supply room, we found this one wallpaper at Wallpaper City or someplace that, of course, hadn't sold in years. There was this yellow diamond stuff that we started using, and every room got another wallpaper. But and we, found used file cabinets which were painted different colors. But hopefully, there's a way that this place kind of hangs together based on, the idea and the texture and the pattern and those same ideas that have sort of permeated other projects in the office. Real quickly, just going through some other things we do. Furniture, we're doing a lot of furniture. This was for another project. This is some office furniture, and then we ended up doing it for ourselves, sort of conference seating and sort of all of these stools. This is our holiday decoration 1 year in the office. The slide on the left is a line of kids' furniture you saw in that Warner Brothers project, and the photographs down below show sort of all different sizes and shapes and configurations it comes in. We had a lot of fun with the Barbie chair competition. I guess it was last year, a year and a half ago. And our Barbie chair needed to be a flexible, changeable, modern Barbie chair. And so we developed this thing called the gel lounge, where it could be shaped and turned and manipulated to suit Barbie's needs and personality. This was a line of furniture we did for Disney, and they, again, like every client, gives you a sort of specific budget to work with, and we couldn't buy what we wanted to that budget, so we, of course, decided to make it. So we wanted to make all these tables for them, and the common idea was, this red project I told you about. We had a lot of red in it, and we kept on thinking about kids and how to make these tables, and the operator said we want to have some tables, we want to have some big tables, some small tables, we want to be able to push all the tables together so all the kids can come together, they can go apart. And so we thought, of course, the answer is vegetables. And so we're going to make this line of vegetable tables. So we have a bean table and a squash table and a tomato table. We have a toast table. I'm not quite sure how toast slipped in there. But you can see the little diagrams in the right-hand side of the drawings that show how all these kind of vegetables fit together, so that one table is like a one-kid table, then you have a two-kid table and a four-kid table and a six table. You get the idea. And these tables can be combined in any sort of way. And in the end, I think they're fun. I think they have personality. But they came about saying, okay, how do we do this? How do we make these tables different sizes? How do you make them combined? You can't use squares and rectangles for that. It's not going to work right, And so you try to start manipulating other forms. In the end, hopefully the idea sort of takes it over, and the vegetable idea may not be apparent to anybody, but it might be. But we kind of had fun with it. This was another chair that was developed for a kid product. We were given the task of, they wanted a big stuffed over chair in their room, but they complained about, well, if we have this big chair, then we can't do other things in the space, and it takes up too much room, and it's too heavy, and we want a chair with really big arms, so all the kids can sit in the arms, they can kind of climb on it, and somebody can read a story. But it'd be really nice if we had a couch instead, because if a kid is nursing, you want to be able to lie down, if you want to have a kid take a nap on you, and you get all this stuff, and you sort of say, what do you do with it? And so we started thinking about, our idea for this one was sort of George Jetson and ricochets, and this sort of lounge chair with these huge arms you could sit in, you could lay down on, you can move around if you needed to, would be sort of balanced, the kids could climb all over it. We made full-size models in the office of this. We had a really good furniture maker help us. This is one of our prototypes of really trying to examine how you make a form like that, how you do all the structure, how you encase it, how you stuff it. This was another one of our great Guido projects. He was relentless about finding parts for this. Every single part on this thing, we basically bought someplace else and found a way to get it together. The little red dot that's on the wheels that we had milled from huge pieces of white plastic, basically, are caps they use on screws for playground equipment, And so it's sort of just trying to think and be clever and not give up and put things together to sort of make something like that happen. We made 18 of these, I think. Another set of furniture. This was designed for a client who kept complaining that he had this huge lawn. It looked over the Pacific Ocean. It was like infinity. And every single chair he put out there, some of the Lutyens bench, just like went away. It was like no one ever could see it. And so he wanted to have this really big set of garden furniture. The other requirement was his kind of fantasy, although I don't think he's ever done it, was that he wanted to be able to have like lunches. People would go out to this huge furniture and they'd sit out over the Pacific Ocean and have lunches out there. So we sort of designed these benches and kind of overscaled chairs that had really wide arms and tables and all sorts of things attached to them so you could actually sit out there with things. And the idea about how they were made, these are sort of a cross between sort of an Adirondack chair on drugs and a piece of craftsman furniture, that the parts sort of work to make its structure and make its form. Its construction is really pretty simple, that just the slats and the base seat actually vary in width, but all the legs and the supports, which are the spacers for everything, are sort of constant. So hopefully there was some sort of clean thinking, which allowed us to be kind of free in the forms of it. I like the lime green color we used. This is another client that didn't have a very big garden. They really wanted to have a place to grow beans and tomatoes on. So we made this sort of oil derrick that could hold tomato plants. And so the drawing on the left just shows how you plant things at the base of it, and they grow up and they sort of hang off these big arms that come off of it. And then we put this kind of funny carrot wind vane on the top of it. Some light fixtures, 2 different light fixtures, one wood and glass, one metal and glass. A lot of sort of thought went into sort of how, again, all the pieces go together, how the glass is held, shadows, the really big scales. The one on the left, that light's probably, I don't know, maybe 5 feet tall, and this light's probably 3.5 feet tall. These were kind of fun. These are these huge stone lanterns. This is for a house in Brentwood, a kind of a country house. And we didn't know how to sort of light the walkway. And so we made these kind of big pumpkins out of stone that have lights inside of them. And in between, we took out the mortar in between all the stones, so the light comes sort of penetrating through all these stone pieces and sort of lights the path. And there's a big piece of sandstone that sits on top of these with holes drilled in the top of it. So as you walk down the stairs from the house, you see the hole pattern with the sort of light coming through it at nighttime. As you walk up the stairs in the daytime, at nighttime, you see the light coming from, the cracks in the stone. And then we put this kind of funny log up on top of it because we felt for some reason the stone top might blow away. So we had to have some way to sort of put that log up there. And we designed this and drew it, and Frank did actually this really, really cool drawing for it, and they started building it. And one of the things that was dependent on is that underneath this stone slab, there's sort of a mortar ring that helps you sort of fit this like a lid on top of this big bowl. But because each one of those sort of pumpkins is irregular, they aren't perfect circles, we could not figure out how we were ever going to get that mortar ring to work for each basin. And so at the end, we ended up making these a little bit larger. Now they were 30 inches, now they're 36 inches. And the size was derived that Pat's daughter in the office, who was the smallest kid at the time, had to be able to climb inside this thing so we could put the lid on top of her so she could take a pencil and make a circle around the top of it so we could make a template in order to put that mortar. And they're so much better being that bigger size, as far as the form goes. So a lot of times you just can't predict how things are going to work out, but they work out. This is a light fixture that this guy owns this huge fabric company, and he sells fabric everywhere. And so we were kind of thinking about it, and these lights came about from the idea of a pair of scissors, and that we wanted to find a way of throwing light back down at night on this perennial garden. There are a pair of these lights by the front door. And so these kind of big wings developed that would be like light shields that would reflect light back down the ground plane so you could see the plant material. And then where you walk, we sort of opened it up so the translucent glass came back and sort of lit the walkway. These were sort of a nightmare to have fabricated. Dale in the office spent, 5 months or 6 months working with this guy, but it was worth it. They're really a lot of fun. Last couple things. For a project for Mattel Toys, we ran into another budget problem, and we didn't have enough money in the budget to have like a library and a TV and a science area in every single classroom. They had this big sort of budget cut. And so we came up with this idea, well, why don't we design you some really cool carts? You can just have one library and one TV and one science area, and you can roll the carts from room to room so you don't have to duplicate those in every single classroom. And they said, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. And so we sort of pushed that a lot more, and we ended up with this thing called the Center Read, which is this library that has cushions that hold all the books in when it's moving from classroom to classroom. But then you take the cushions off it. Those are seats the kids sit around it. And then these kind of big antlers or light fixtures and a little podium for someone to tell stories on. This was a art bat that they could roll outside. It was the holder for sort of like water toys so the kids could play in it. This piece down here we called the envelope, and it was the information stand for all the parents to have slots for all their information. And we kept thinking that when the parents are sitting here reading all the notices, that the kids are going to be so bored, what are they going to do? And they want to sort of crawl around. And so we really got into this space underneath this animal. And I don't know if you can see in that little sketch, it's kind of hairy. We use shag carpeting underneath it. So the kids get in there and kind of hang out in this little space with this sort of hairy underbelly of this little beast and really thinking about what they were going to do while their parents were really doing the stuff that they thought was the serious stuff. Two more. This was the media mutt that sort of held, all sorts of media stuff, VCRs and a camcorder. And this one was actually I can't read, this is the Crafty Owl, which was the arts and crafts that had these kind of big wings that were tables that would come down so that all the kids would gather around and they'd do all the arts projects and they'd clean up it and fold it back up and they would wheel it away to someplace else. Nobody ever comes to you and says, okay, can you give us some animal carts so we can put stuff in? And and that's when I say you really have to take and look at the client's needs, find a way to solve their problems, that you're going to save money if you do this, and it allows you the freedom to do something you really want to do. And it's the only way you can get somebody to do something like this. Two last projects. These are two projects that are under construction right now. They're both for Universal. One of them is a pedestrian bridge that links basically a parking lot into City Walk. It's 250 feet long. And when we started the project, we were given a Caltrans concrete pedestrian bridge with chain link fence on the side of it and said, well, we really want to use this. This is what we can afford to use. And can you kind of stylize it for us? Can you kind of look at it for us? Which is always such a weird request. And so you get into it, you start asking lots of questions, you find out how much it costs, whether the things cost, and we sort of ended up with this big steel truss that goes and links the parking garage from a sort of a tower and elevator piece on the other side that's large enough that you occupy that truss as you move through it. And then one of the initial requests from the client was they wanted these structures sort of to fit in with the landscape, whatever that means. And so we sort of came up with this idea of trying to make the experience of using this bridge as if you're walking through a cloud. And so the enclosure material that keeps you from falling out of this truss basically is a really big scale perforated metal panel that has sort of 3-inch big perforations in it. And it hits a datum line that's sort of level on the planet where the truss is actually sloping from one elevation to another elevation. So as you move along this truss, you're basically in the cloud, you're completely encompassed in this sort of powder blue, smoggy color, And then as you move through it, all of a sudden the cloud sort of drops down, you emerge in sort of seeing where you're going. And so it's a pretty efficient system as far as enclosure goes and structure, but hopefully it has an idea about it. And this other project is something you go through this bridge and then you come to this, they call it a toll plaza, which is sort of like a place where you pay money. And there are all these sort of booths here with this roof that covers it and a little toll office. And most of their toll booths at Universal, they call them Darth Vader booths. They're sort of ominous and dark looking. And so we wanted to sort of have them have another take on it. So we have these kind of very bright, kind of almost like garden bugs that sort of sit here and sort of greet you with these kind of green legs that open up that you can drive through it. And that when you come up to it, the interior of them are all bright sort of coral pink color, almost like the bug has kind of opened its mouth to you. And you drive through those things underneath this very flat plane that's sort of like a boomerang slices sky that's moving fast. It's at a very steep angle as far as its plan idea. And then you pass through it while you're sort of looking at the landscape beyond. And finally, I just wanted to end up with these two slides, which are really specifically not sort of building or project slides. One of them is this storytelling rug that I showed earlier that Shaning in the office designed. And I think it's really important if you look at this, that this design is based on program and function and craftsmanship. We really had to learn so much about weaving and how you differentiate weaves and heights of things. It's certainly based on form and color. It has ordering ideas about it. It's loaded with iconography as far as meaning and intent. And if somebody said, that all the components that it takes to be an architect that you're learning in school can be used to sort of design something, like this, I think this sort of like fulfills all those sort of things that we typically classify what buildings are about. And this garden on the other side is sort of an imaginary garden, and it's sort of about shelter and emotion and sequence and spatial enclosure and time. And the idea about this garden is that there's this kind of stand of eucalyptus trees that you walk through this sort of gravel mat into, and you hear the crunching of the gravel, and there's this sort of water pieces sheeting into the gravel, and there's this one sort of bed of planting material that only flowers on May 1st every year. It's their bulbs. And, I bet everybody is there on April 30th to see if the bulbs are out yet. And inside that, there's this kind of funny place that's this bench piece up here where you can kind of sit there, and there's a special compartment that has a book in it or some wine, and it's big enough so you can go there by yourself, and you can take a nap, or you can sit up, or your honey can come and sit next to you over there on it. And there's this kind of big kind of tent piece that comes down over it that was meant to feel like a huge rain cloud, this really dark bluey sort of purple color, so that you could sit there in this space, maybe with your honey, with this covering on you in the rain, smelling the eucalyptus trees, hearing the rain hit the gravel, that it's an emotional sort of evocative space. And so I kind of want to leave you with thinking about going back to your desk, going back to, all your projects, and trying to take all that stuff you're trying to do and do something else with it. And you don't need to worry about what I'm going to do when you're going to grow up, And the kind of education that designers receive is really terrific. It's all about thinking and about process and how you make something. And I think it's really freeing. And so just like keep going and just open your mind and just take away all the definitions that everybody gives you as far as what you should do. So that's it. So does anybody have anything they want to ask me about or not? No questions? Questions? Okay, thanks for coming.